Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here. This is my first time in Lithuania as well. How many of you actually heard about Lean? How about Six Sigma? How about TOC? Well, you all heard about TOC this morning, I guess. I was really impressed with the hospitality that we've seen during the last couple of days. I'm looking forward to coming back. This is a wonderful place. One of the things they told us on the way to the airport, though, that you have very cold winters. I spent 6 years in Michigan, and I know what this is about. So I have a little video for you first, and probably a lot of you experienced this. I heard your temperature could go down to below 20 Celsius. So I don't know how many of you have to clean up your car before you go to work. Let's see what happens to this specific project. Oops. He didn't focus on the right project, did he? So in this presentation, we'll talk about how these leading methodologies can be integrated to get the best return for you. And I'll give you a couple examples from government, public services, as well as healthcare. Some of the examples we discussed in our book. And then I'll talk about some of the top reasons why you should consider integrating these three methodologies. Novasis is now celebrating its 10th year. We've been working with the maritime industry first, then expanded into naval aviation and the public sector and military, and then into healthcare. And we are based in New Orleans, Louisiana. Okay, so here is a quiz for you right after lunch to get you engaged, I guess. If you have a simple system with 3 steps, let's say you are processing a form, the first person is able to process 26 forms, the sections that are related to that step. The next one can only handle 13 forms an hour. A lot of things she or he has to check. And then third step, they check 1 or 2 boxes so they can process 22 forms an hour. So how many forms you can process in this system? Let's say this is some kind of an application for a tax refund. What is the maximum you can get per hour from the system? 13, right? That's our bottleneck. Well, what if the system only needs 10 forms per hour processed? Did the picture change? Now we have more capacity than the need, right? Well, sometimes this may not be enough either. We have to take a look at the big picture. Let's zoom back and let's look at the 50,000 foot level. Sometimes these processes are related to each other. One of the fathers of systems thinking, Russell Ackoff, once said, a system is not the sum of its parts, it's the product of parts interactions. If you take your car and take all the pieces, put on the floor here, would these pieces take you from point A to B? No, right? It's the interaction among those parts that takes us from A to B. So it is important for us to see the big picture and the interdependencies among the processes. We've been working with a hospital on the East Coast, and we were looking at one of their advanced liver cancer treatments. And we looked at the core process where the patient is actually treated, but then we looked at the big picture, all sorts of procedures they had to go through, starting with the approval from the insurance. This is a very expensive treatment. And then, of course, they are using some radioactive microspheres that they are injecting into the liver. And that's a very spatial process. You have to spatial order it. Handling of radioactive materials is also spatial. And then there is the pharmacy piece, because it's followed before the treatment. You actually go through some chemo. And then, of course, there is the big piece after the treatment. Hospital wants to make sure they get paid for this very expensive procedure. To make the matters worse, some of these boxes we see are subcontracted. Like interventional radiology was a subcontracted piece. So when you look at the goal for the entire system versus the goals of some boxes here, it may not be the same. Well, in order to get the best for the system, we need everybody's collaboration, right? This complicated treatment requires a lot of synchronization. And of course, if you are the patient, you are really impatient about getting the treatment, because every single day that is delayed, your situation is getting worse. So in Lean, in many cases, we just look at the process. In many cases, we may not look at the big picture. We've been working with a hospital that hired us first to deploy Lean Six Sigma first. And then we started going through that problems, and there was one problem that neither Lean nor Six Sigma could have helped. There was a conflict between the doctors and nurses related to induction of the babies. So we introduced the conflict resolution tools of TOC, the thinking processes, and the results were so amazing, they gave the award of the year to that project, and here is a testimony from that project.
This was an experience. I'm totally shocked at the outcome. When we first started this constraints management, of course this being the first time for this project here at St. Alexis, I was familiar with some of the other Lean Six Sigma projects we have done, and the BSAs and the RAWs, but this is a totally different animal. And I have to admit, when I first started, the first day when I went to how you guys did so far, it was, I thought, oh great, they're just going to tell us we need more staffing, and the physicians are going to say we need more induction slots, and that's going to be the answer. But as I found out today, I am so thrilled, and it is, it's emotional, because we've had so much difficulty in this area for the last 2 years, 3 years even, and I think we actually have some answers and some things that we can actually work on. It's going to be better.
Right, and I think just the methodology is so different than Lean and Six Sigma, but it really captured the essence of the complex problems that we have in healthcare, because it's not always just about a process and looping all those processes together and fixing a piece and putting it together with another piece. If you don't deal with the system and the issues that are going on within the system and the conflicts that exist, I mean, you're never going to get to the root cause of what's going on and really be able to make a difference. And so I'm so excited to have had this event. I have chills today just thinking about the possibilities for this, and I know the heartache that these nurses and physicians have been going through, and to see them come together, both thinking that it was the other people's fault and blaming each other, and then to come into the room and at the end of the day say, oh my gosh, like we're in this together and we're causing each other's problems, but they had no idea, and
they had no idea the distress they were causing.
Right.
Their nurses themselves and what their partners were doing. And yet they were saying that, we know this is going to be a good thing, and we know that this is what we need to do and improve, but we aren't willing to go stand out there by ourselves. We need the nurses, we need administration, and we need support in order to make it happen. So I'm thrilled. This is by far the best event yet.
Okay. The conflict resolution tool of the TOC is statistically the most frequently used tool. How many of you heard about it? Also known as the conflict cloud. If both sides of the conflict have the same goal, you can actually generate win-win solutions, an extremely powerful and a relatively easy to learn tool. So constraints management really gives us this big picture and helps us to focus our efforts to get the maximum throughput, and shows us the key leverage points in the system. Because we all have very limited resources when it comes to performance improvement. We want to spend our resources very wisely. In the meantime, Lean really helps us simplify our processes. In many cases, we have capacity issues because, as we learned in the morning from Ken, we created these very complicated processes. Lean helps us to streamline those processes, but also it helps us to see the waste. There are 7 different types of waste that we'll talk about, and it has a very easy to apply way of identifying waste and removing that waste. In the meantime, though, some processes have a lot of variation in them, and if you don't control variation well, it also makes it very difficult to control our processes. So these 3 methodologies are very synergistic. The most important thing is to find out at the system level what is critical for the organization, what is the goal, and then using the right tool for the right problem at the right time. You can use a screwdriver to open a can, but it's going to be difficult and messy. So to simplify these 3 methodologies, we use these 3 windows analogy. The constraints management window is like looking at the forest and identifying the best tree to pick the fruit from, the big picture. Which tree I'm going to focus on first. Then once I know the tree, first I want to pick up the low-hanging fruits. And Lean has very effective tools to pick these low-hanging fruits with very little effort, very fast. In the meantime, though, at some point you run out of these low-hanging fruits and you are really looking at these juicy fruits at higher branches of the tree that are more difficult to pick, takes more effort. That's what Six Sigma does, that it helps you to get a really big return, but it's not as fast as Lean. There are ways of speeding it up, but as I'm going to show you in a few minutes, it requires a lot of good data collection, analysis of the data, and so forth. So when you look at from these 3 windows, you see a lot of synergy among those methodologies. When I started the process improvement journey, I started with Six Sigma. My background was in reliability management, and when I heard about Six Sigma, I said, great, finally we have a very disciplined way of improving. And then we got exposed to Lean, and then one day we were selected to integrate TOC with Lean Six Sigma for the largest supply chain on earth, the Naval Aviation Enterprise. And it was an amazing journey since then. So when we look at the goal of performance improvement, what are we looking for? We are looking for high impact, superior performance improvement, very high return on investment. And there are 3 critical success factors for this, starting with focusing mechanism, and then a good waste reduction strategy and a variation reduction strategy. And in order to focus our efforts, we need to find out where the system constraint is. That means you are going to need some working knowledge of constraints management. I'm going to take a deep breath here because in the United States, Lean and Six Sigma are much more popular, especially in the government and healthcare sectors. And we kept asking people, why is that? Because everybody read the goal and they love it. Well, one of the executives of one of these Fortune 100 companies told me, he said, if you cannot explain a concept in 10 minutes or less, it usually is difficult to get the masses behind you. But there are other reasons too. Six Sigma had Jack Welch behind him and behind it, and he really advertised it. Lean just has a great name. When they hear the name, a lot of people say, wow, let's take a closer look at it. So With the constraints management, when we first read the goal, we were introduced to these 5 focusing steps. But as we started working on real projects, we realized that TOC has evolved a lot since the days of gold when it was first written. A lot of people are now focusing on the first 3 steps. Identify the constraint or control point, the key leverage point, whatever is limiting your flow. Then you try to get the most out of your constraint without spending money. That's the key piece. And then the rest of the system tries to do their best to get the most out of that constraint. Now, if the improvements in your throughput is not sufficient, then you go to this step 4. It's a strategic decision you make. And it usually means spending more money. How many of you cross a bridge to come to work every morning? Well, in New York, where I have been living for like 8 years, we cross a lot of bridges or tunnels. In the morning in California, for example, there is an island, North Island, and there's a lot of traffic from the city of San Diego to the island. Well, they decided to allocate an extra lane that is not used from the opposite direction to be able to get the most out of the bottleneck. But if the population of San Diego is doubled, that's not going to be sufficient. In Japan, in one bridge, they actually added an extra lane. In many places, they try to figure out whether they are going to have double-deck bridges and so forth. But first, we try to do our best by simplifying our processes, dealing with some policy issues to get the most out of the constraint without spending money. As you heard Ken, at least in the United States, there is no more money for the public sector or healthcare or many other places. So how do we reduce lean? One of the first tools we use with lean is this value stream analysis. It shows us the entire value stream. We basically look at the key steps of the process. And one of the key things we do, though, before we jump into eliminating every single waste in the process, we try to find out what is the bottleneck in that process and see how we are going to deal with it. And then we look at the ideal flow. If we had no restrictions, how it would have flowed. And then we come up with an action item plan. Then we take a closer look at that action item plan again and question every single action item. What is the level of effort and what is the impact of that improvement on our overall goal, whatever metric we are focusing on. And when we look at each step closely, we ask 3 questions to determine whether that step is value added or not. First one is, whatever is happening in that step, is it changing its form, shape, function? Or like when you photocopy something, is anything changing? No. Next thing is, if you were the customer of that process, would you pay for that step? So if you have a correction step, customer would say, well, you shouldn't have made a mistake in the first place, so they wouldn't want to pay for that correction step. And then the last one is it done right the first time? If you don't say yes to all of these 3 questions, then that step is not value added. Now, some of them are required because of some regulations. Then you say it is non-value added but required, and it's usually more difficult to change those. But you do your best to eliminate non-value added steps as long as the effort is really worth it, worth the impact. So here is an example we did. I looked at the process analysis and looked at each step and see which one is really slowing down the process, and the consultation step was taking 55 minutes. So we said we really need to take a look at this portion of the pipe to be able to improve the flow. In the case of lean, which has its roots in Toyota production system, when we look at the big picture, we try to figure out, well, are we moving too much material, information back and forth? Do I have too much inventory? A lot of people think inventory is an asset. How many of you think inventory is an asset? Not after you got exposed to TOC, right? Motion, people moving back and forth, back and forth. We usually track the people. We physically follow them, how many miles they are making during the day to do their job. But the biggest contributor to the waste is waiting. If you could take care of waiting one way or another, that's a huge help. Then we have overproduction, overprocessing, and of course, making mistakes and doing rework. In the case of Six Sigma, it has also evolved. It used to have 4 steps: the make process, measure, analyze, improve, control, until the finance industry started implementing it, and they added the D, the define phase, to have a better understanding of what is the pain and how are we going to measure the improvement. And then in the measure phase, this is where you really need to have some data to quantify how bad the pain is. And then comes the analyze phase, where you try to figure out what are the biggest factors that contribute to variation. Nothing is improved until this step. You know now the key factors for variation, but now you need to come up with some solutions to control these key actors. This is, you have to do again a lot of analysis to determine whether the investment you are going to make is going to pay off. Here is the nice addition from Six Sigma that Lean did not have. A lot of Lean improvements after a few months went back to their old ways, because usually people don't like change, and if you don't have a good control plan in place, they go back to their old ways. So we also come up with a control plan to make sure people don't go back to their old ways. Now, these Six Sigma projects in the past used to take 3 to 6 months. Well, if you have a lot of pain, do you want to wait for 3 months? Forget about 6 months. So a lot of people were thinking about how we can accelerate these Six Sigma projects. When GE started applying it, they were able to reduce the duration of some Six Sigma projects up to all the way to 1 week. But we also got some help from TOC. Chris Zeffro from Seagate at the time started pioneering the use of thinking process tools in Six Sigma. Current reality tree in the analyze phase really speeds up because it shows you the cause and effect relationships. Conflict cloud really shows you the core issue, so you would really focus on the right thing. And the future reality tree also helps you in the right direction to find out the right solutions. In fact, black belts voted these tools as the best tools in their black belt toolbox at Seagate. So after our experience with airspeed and with Navy Medicine, we developed a roadmap that we call System CPI, Continuous Process Improvement with System Level Impact, that we've been implementing to organizations that have no programs, greenfield programs that failed, that needed revitalization, or very successful programs that need to go to the next level, to go to new heights. And each organization is unique, so we try to customize our deployments. Now, how are we going to select the right tool when we know what the problem is? And this is not an easy thing. You do need a lot of experience, but once you look at your big picture, understand the system and the key issue in the system, the problem, one of the first things we ask is this a flow issue? Are we trying to shorten the duration of some kind of a project or length of stay? If it is not flow issue, the next thing we ask is, do we know the root cause of this problem? If we do know the root cause, the next question is, do we have a solution for it? Sometimes very simple solutions, just do it, will do the trick. One of the hospitals that is doing lean, Care, is very famous for doing these very little improvements. Just do it. They see the problem, they see the solution, they just do it, just like that. Sometimes we know the solution, but it could be like buffer management. It's a TOC solution, and it may not be something you can just do it. You may need the software, you may need to do a lot of convincing of doctors or government officials, but we have a lot of good solutions for a lot of problems now in our toolbox. Now, if we don't have the solution, but you know the root cause, then we have this focused rapid improvement workshop. Japanese used to call them Kaizen events. Now, when we identify the constraint, we also do a rapid improvement event to figure out what are we going to do to get the most out of this bottleneck. That's again a rapid improvement event. Writing a new standard operating procedure could be a rapid improvement event. These things could take 2 hours to a week, but not more than that. Then it is not called rapid. It would be a slow improvement workshop. And then if we really don't know the root cause, then we have an option to use Six Sigma, or we could use the thinking processes of TOC, or a combination of both, depending on the nature of the problem and the urgency and the resources. Do we have any questions so far, especially for this selection tree? How am I doing time-wise here? Good. No questions? Am I going too fast? Okay. All right, let's start giving some examples. I'll start with the hospitals. In the US, a lot of healthcare executives are aware of the very first book. Virginia Mason Medical Center was one of the pioneers of implementing toilet production system, and they got some great success stories. And then On Demand is about the success story of Telecare. And if you look at the application of Lean Six Sigma in the US, American Society of Quality did a survey in 2009, and the results are similar, I guess, but about half of the hospitals are doing Lean, another half is doing Six Sigma or a combination of it. But very few actually have full deployment. They may be doing one value stream here and there, but they don't really have a hospital-wide deployment. A lot of them see these as quality improvement programs, and quality departments are usually located at the basement of the hospitals, not in the management floor, at least in the US and in some European countries that I've been to. And if it is not impacting the bottom line, you usually do not get the attention of the CFO and the CEO. However, we were very pleased to hear that in the Netherlands now 25 hospitals are implementing TOC, and in the UK, Israel and New Zealand we see more and more applications of it, but in the US there are only a few applications of it that are on the public domain. And hopefully with the success stories from the Netherlands and the UK, we'll get more people excited about utilizing TOC with Lean Six Sigma. So I'm going to start with an example from the emergency room. So we have a patient who is having an heart attack, and doctors decided they are going to have this balloon treatment. So there's this door to balloon time metric, which is very critical. Every single minute counts. Every single minute you are delayed, more heart muscles are dying. And this door to balloon time is actually one of the key quality metrics measured among the hospitals in the US. So when we started working with the hospital, we first looked at the ideal state. If we had no waste, how long this would have taken? And these are some clinical procedures in there. You are basically going into the heart of the patient. And when they looked at the numbers, what do you see here? 33 and a half minutes. And then they looked at the big picture and they tried to figure out where the big constraint was. And the EKG to table part of the flow was found to be the main constraint. And they tried to figure out what they can do to get the most out of those steps. How can they speed up those steps? And they also used a tool called the interference diagram that I'm going to show you in a minute. And then, of course, when they use this interference diagram, which is a very, very simple tool to use. You could actually use this tonight. You basically do a circle, write down what is your goal, you want to get more out of what, just a line, and then start listing what kinds of other things are preventing you from focusing on that goal, and how much time you are spending on these other things. And then do a Pareto diagram or prioritize them and start thinking out of the box to see whether you can delegate them, postpone them, to really focus on what is the most important thing for you. Very easy, very fast. People love it. And then they did the mapping. They had a lot of swim lanes. Each swim lane represents one department. And all these red steps are all non-value added steps. Yellow ones, some regulatory steps. Green ones are the ones that are really adding value, really helping patient to get that pump. And after they did the analysis, they decided they're going to leave these 3 red steps. The effort was too much, too expensive. In many cases, in these process improvement projects, people love to bring IT. Let's have a software here, let's have a software there. And usually those things take a long time and cost a lot of money, and usually are not producing results very fast. So they focused on these improvements, and overall they went from 66 minutes to 53, about 13-15 minutes improvement, which may not sound too much, but if you're having a heart attack, 15 minutes may make a difference between life and death. So the next one is about a private hospital that I was involved in. And this hospital had a problem. They were not attracting enough patients. When we started one day, they had about 1,000 people working in that hospital, and they had 100 patients. Not good. And when we looked at the big picture, they said, oh, we need more patients right now. We need to increase the volume of the patients. That was their biggest goal. So we took a closer look at this process and first looked at the appointment scheduling, see how it is working. Well, their call center was outsourced, and then the operating room people had their own scheduling mechanism that didn't talk with the call center system. And then we looked at the policies of the hospital. They were blocking certain slots for surgeries. And they also found out that a lot of phones that were coming into the call center were not being picked up. Sometimes they had a high volume and they just didn't have enough people. Here we go, you don't want to spend $10 an hour for an additional call center person and lose a patient that could bring significant revenue to the hospital. Those things are called artificial constraints or dummy constraints. Doctors also had some special privileges. This hospital is not in the center of the town, and with a 1-hour notice, they had the privileges to reschedule patients. And patients did not like that. So the top-level management changed some of those policies, and they also have decided to take a closer look at these slots and how they are appointed. And if they didn't have any surgery scheduled 24 hours before the date, they were opening up those slots for patients who just show up without appointments or people who needed to be switched. And we did actually find a couple bottlenecks, and this was one of the very rare events. We ended up adding more steps to be able to bring the process under control, but after that, their revenue went up over $2.5 million within a year. So we were able to plug the holes in the appointment scheduling and the undesirable effects of the slot management policies of the hospital. Here's another one that is related to the critical lab tests. Again, when you are in the ED, you really want to get your lab results really fast. Look at how many steps they have for this specific test. 117 steps. 25 handoffs, going from one department to the other, coming back, and each of those things takes time. And after doing a value stream analysis, again they left 3 of these red steps, but steps went down from 117 to 45. Handoffs were reduced for more than 50%. Okay, now let's move to the government side of things. This is the Texas workforce, and this was a pilot program, and we actually teamed up with Kevin Fox from Viable Vision for this program. Federal government is giving tax credits if you hire certain people that meet certain criteria. And then they gave money to Texas to process these tax credit applications too. But they had no idea how many people were going to apply for that program. Well, once they started the program, they were overwhelmed. They were getting so many applications, and the team was way too small to process them all. And if you don't file your tax papers on time, what happens? You don't get your money back, right? Or it gets delayed. So a lot of business owners were getting upset, and they were calling their representatives. So this was the very first pilot project. So the next picture was to look at the big picture. Very high level, just a few steps, but key steps to figure out where is our biggest constraint. How can we increase the capacity, as Ken was talking about? Well, this step, the staff review, that basically makes a determination of yes, this is a legitimate application, they deserve the tax credit or not. These people were doing all sorts of other things. When they did their interference diagram, they saw that they were doing a lot of multitasking besides doing reviews, all sorts of other things that needed to be delegated or, if needed, removed. So here is what happened the very first 6 months, and you can actually see month by month. And this was a continuous effort. As they learn more, they have made some tweaks here and there. So what are we seeing here as far as the number of applications are concerned? It started with 10,000. It went to 24,000 in a matter of 6 months. And this is a direct quote from the government's report, which is in the public domain. If anybody wants it, just tell me, I'll send you the link. And let's take a look at the dollar value then. What do you see here? From 175 million to $272 million. Almost $100 million more tax returns to the business owners. That's a lot of money. And then when you look at the impact of the processing backlog, it used to be 5 months, and it went down to less than 2 months. Determinations used to take 194 days, went down to 101 days, and actually they kept improving after these public results. Any questions so far? Next one is related to a contracting process. This process, again, we looked at the big picture, found out the constraints, and one of the constraints steps was related to the request for proposal step. When we looked at that step, I mean, what do you really need to create this request for proposal? Well, they said all you need is 4 steps in an ideal world. And the agency really wanted to create contracts faster and faster within the parameters of the law. I mean, if you're a government agency, you have to be very careful. They have all sorts of regulations about how you prepare the request for proposals and how you do the evaluations. So we created a team, and this was an amazing team. These value stream analyses usually take 5 days. They did it in 2 days, and they not only reduced these steps from 44 to 18, but they made a remarkable improvement in the handoffs. Previously, this request for proposal package was going through 16 handoffs, and each department was reviewing it separately, and they had to wait 2 days between the departments. And when they took a closer look at this, they said, why don't we just meet in one room, review it before coming to the meeting, and let's just spend 2 hours together and finalize it. Sounds very radical, right? And you have the legal people and you have other departments. They decided to give it a try. And when they did their analysis, they said, oh, we need 2 hours for this. And then when they did the first application, where basically 16 handoffs went to 1, in 34 minutes they finished it. Emails were going out. No kidding, we finished it in 34 minutes. So in this case, using the right tool really helped us out to speed up that piece of the process. A few other examples from the government. Memorandum of Understandings, reduction of cycle times. Again, mostly value stream based efforts. It went from 29 days to 14 days. The new employee check-in. If you are working for the federal government, you have to go through security clearance and so forth. And in this case, they have increased their productivity by over 7,600 man hours. Any questions so far? Okay. Now, we were trying to come up with a list of the reasons why you really would like to integrate these methodologies, because even today, you are going to see different camps. You are going to see the TOC camp, you are going to see the Lean camp, Six Sigma camp, and then there are some groups, they just call themselves process improvement. When I started working on process improvement, which was in the mid-90s, it was worse. These were like three different religions. People didn't even want to talk about them. First, they started seeing the synergy between Lean and Six Sigma, and of course the Department of the Navy really embraced it. However, in their original document they said TOC is also a very powerful one and you should consider it, but with the exception of few agencies like Naval Aviation, the Marines, most federal agencies applied either Lean or Lean Six Sigma. So I probably need a drum roll. I don't want to go into the details of each of those, but the very first thing for the integration, especially to bring the TOC piece, is the focus piece. It really gives you a crystal clear picture of where is the best tree, where we should focus our efforts. And it really shows you your leverage points. And one problem with the TOC is it has been evolving and each consultant has their own tweaks to it. You are going to see some consultants call it control point. They actually pick a constraint instead of looking at the constraint. But as the methodology matures, we are hoping we will have some kind of a standard. And not all waste is equal. That's one thing I learned well when we did the Texas workforce deployment. Lean people sometimes spend way too much to get very little. That's a problem. Same thing with Six Sigma. Six Sigma is a very focused effort and you really look at one piece. And sometimes you may actually improve that piece of the flow very well, but if you look at the big picture, you may actually make the overall throughput worse. So you have to be very careful when you do those kinds of things. Another thing is inertia. 5 focusing steps has one more sentence that not everybody puts there. What is that? Do not let the inertia stop you from improving. Don't just get comfortable. Oh, we have the system going well. Well, you have to keep looking at what is happening to the outside world. When I had my first Blueberry, when I was at the university, they haven't even heard about Blueberry. It was the latest and greatest, and now we just heard somebody bought them. Kodak was one of the first implementers of Six Sigma. What happened to Kodak? Polaroid. One day somebody came up with these digital cameras and overnight, oops, their competitive advantage is gone. So you have to keep looking at outside as well and don't just get comfortable. Again, TOC brings this very good practical risk management mechanism with the buffers. That is something very unique that TOC brought into the process improvement work. And then the right measures. The state government of Utah is really pioneering some measures that are unheard of in the state governments. There is this focus on cost reduction all over the place, especially in healthcare now. And people don't really understand. Sometimes focusing on cost reduction may actually cost you more money. But it is so difficult to change that mindset. And defining throughput, especially in the public sector, in healthcare, is not easy. People don't understand the language very well. Same thing with the hospitals. When we were writing our book, we looked at the literature to figure out how they define throughput for hospitals. Well, depending on who was writing the article, they had different definitions. If it is an insurance company, it was different. If you look at from the patient's perspective, it was different. So this is another very critical thing that TOC brought. But the tool set is very important too. Besides Lean Six Sigma, there are other improvement systems too. How many of you heard a methodology called TRIZ, T-R-I-Z? Just one. Two. It stands for Theory of Inventive Problem Solving. It came from Russia. And it actually systematically shows you how to come up with very innovative solutions, especially when you have conflicts. When you design something especially. I came from the ship design world. Well, if you want the ship to go faster, well, you have to compromise certain things. Well, it tells you somebody somewhere already solved your problem in another industry. And they came up with a very powerful metrics, and it has been evolving, but it has about 18 tools. And a lot of the leading companies that embrace Six Sigma are now integrating trees into their tool sets. But it's not as easy to teach. It's even more difficult to teach than TOC. Some of the tools. Some tools are very similar. Well, there is one called ideation, for example. It's very similar to dreaming about an ideal world and then see how close can you get to those. And again, that was first developed in the manufacturing world, and people are now adapting it to the transactional area, the services world. So toolset is not just limited with Lean, Six Sigma, or TOC. We have other tool sets that we can pick and choose. We had an issue with a hospital in upstate New York. In Lean, Six Sigma, even in TOC, you know, okay, I know the constraint. Now you are supposed to come up with some ideas to get the most out of the constraint. There is no cookbook formula there. That's where trees becomes very powerful. In fact, trees people love the conflict cloud. TOC people love trees as well because there is a lot of synergy. Same thing with Lean. Okay, I see the Lean waste steps. Some of them are easy, but when you are designing your ideal state, you need to really think out of the box. Same thing with Six Sigma. So there are some additional tools that help us to come up with innovative solutions. And the execution piece is another one. I was delighted to hear this morning that critical chain principles are now being implemented in hospitals. Critical chain, how many of you heard the critical chain project management application of TOC? Just one, two? This is another amazing application. It helps you to shorten your project durations up to 50%, sometimes even more. Boeing got 10-fold return from critical chain, so they have expanded their Lean program. Now they have Lean plus 10x as their program. But again, it is not well known, and one of the first things it attacks is multitasking. In this performance improvement world, these green belts, black belts, performance improvement specialists, they all have their regular jobs usually, and then this process improvement work is usually on the side. That means what? Multitasking. That means it takes a long time to finish these projects. So we have some great tools again from the TOC world to speed up the execution of the projects, because we really want to get results very fast. And then win-win solutions. Again, this is another huge application. And I know in Malaysia, millions of school children are being exposed to these conflict clouds now. In Florida, in the playgrounds, kids have drawn these things on the floor. Very simple tool to use and incredibly powerful. They are even using them in some prisons. And of course, understanding the synergy is very important, because now I need the drum roll for the biggest one. You could get up to 20 times more return, and there are PhD studies done in this area by integrating these methodologies. Here are some of the 6 books in this area, and you see a few agencies in the US already doing it. In Japan, the Ministry of Infrastructure and Transportation, they have been implementing critical chain for their public works projects for the last 4 years or so. And of course, we have some famous airlines, as you see here. So getting the return is a very critical reason to integrate these. And finally, as a summary, using the right tool on the right problem at the right time, but always from a systems perspective. Never forget about the big picture. From time to time, just stop, get on a hot air balloon and look at your organization from the top. Because effective capacity of your system is determined by the capacity of your system constraint. And now you are saving at a non-bottleneck is known as a mirage. You are wasting your time. So you make sure you are focusing on your bottleneck. And with that, here are some books I recommend. Bob Sproul is also one of our consultants, and he has a blog called Focus and Leverage, where he has a lot of great examples. And tomorrow we will go into the details of this at my workshop. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions?
Any questions?
No questions?
Okay, one
Okay.
question.
Sorry.
She has a question.
What about standards to integrate all 3 processes, and is there any maturity level required for that?
Yeah, I mean, once you change a process, that means you are going to have to come up with a new standard procedure. And if that standard procedure is conflicting with some state or federal regulations, which we have seen a lot, it takes a long time sometimes, and those are those yellow steps. But if you really want it, it is possible, and we've seen it changed. But sometimes they claim that, oh, there is some regulation. When I was at the University of New Orleans, our chancellor asked me, why don't we do this for our university processes? I said, okay. So he picked a form that we used to pay people. And then we started to look at ways to change this form, and people in the payment department, they said, oh, you can't touch that form. We said, why not? They said, oh, there is a regulation for that. Our chancellor was from the business school, and he said, show me that regulation, please. And it turned out they didn't have. Sometimes people just resist change, and they claim there is some regulation you will be violating. But yes, you have to come up with your new standard procedures and train people, make sure it goes well. Any other questions? Well, thank you.